Organized by Internet and Mobile Association of India, along with its sister organizations, Payments Council of India and Fintech Convergence Council, and National Payments Corporation of India. The first is presented by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India and Reserve Bank of India, and supported by Niti Aayog, Startup India, and Invest India. We would like to thank our powered by sponsors Razorpay, brought to you by sponsor Amazon Pay, brought to you by sponsor WhatsApp, in association with partner Google Pay and Open Financial Technologies, and digital payments partner Cash Free Payments. The second edition of the summit, with the theme Fintech Empowering a Global Digital Economy, will provide an in depth understanding of the latest business policy, investment, and technology developments within the fintech landscape globally. We welcome you all for the panel discussion on emerging fintech opportunities at India's first International Financial Service Center, IFSC, in Gift City. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Mr. Prakash Jayaram, the partner E&Y, who would be moderating today's discussion. Please welcome our esteemed set of speakers, Mr. Joseph Joshy, the Chief Technology Officer, International Financial Services Centers Authority, Mr. Somnath Mukherjee, the AVP Business, Zerodha, Mr. Nagendra Kumar, the Chief Business Officer, NSE, Mr. Anupam Verma, the Head International Banking Unit, IFSC Gift City, ICICI Bank. You may put all the questions in the chat box, and the panel may pick up a few at the end and answer to your queries. Thank you so much, and over to you, Mr. Jayaram.
Thank you, Swati. So without much ado, Gift City, as most of you will be aware, is India's first offshore jurisdiction. It's been set up by the government of India to enable India to integrate much more tightly and in a much bigger way with the international financial ecosystem. And in the last year or so, it's seen a tremendous amount of activity enabled by many of the other panelists on this session. So without much further ado, let me ask Mr. Joseph Joshi, the Chief Technology Officer at the International Financial Services Center Authority, which is a regulator for the financial services offered from the Gift City. So Mr. Joshi, the CTO at a regulator is actually quite an interesting role, and probably one of the first in the country. So in the pivotal position that you enjoy at the regulator that's trying to enable the Gift City's services, what do you see happening? Can you just walk us through the journey over the last 9 months or so, and explain a little bit of the genesis of IFSC, what's been happening, and what do you see in the last 9 months or so as the acceleration that's come about?
Absolutely. Thanks, Prakash, and good afternoon to you and fellow panelists, and also to the delegates who are watching us. Really interesting question from your end. But then let me go back to the real genesis. So when you say genesis, the Gift City was born probably around 2013, if I'm not wrong, when the Honorable Prime Minister was the then Chief Minister of Gujarat. And then I believe in April 2015 was when the concept of an IFSC was conceived and operationalized. So at that point in time, we had all the domestic regulators like RBI, SEBI, IRDAI, kind of giving in their regulations for this IFSC, the International Financial Service Center. And that's how the journey started. So the idea was to have this offshore concept, in India, so that it's a very competitive and conducive environment for our own folks within the country, instead of exploring shores at either Singapore or Dubai or other offshore centers. So that's how the journey started. But then as we went along with these different regulators, the ease of doing business and those angles, when they were explored, the government finally decided, let's have a unified regulator. So that's how this IFSC Authority Act. That's how the IFSCA, the Authority Act, was passed by the Parliament sometime in December 2019. So that's for the history. And then by October 2020, we had a functional IFSCA, the powers being given by the four regulators into the acts, and then the operation started. So we are kind of coming to our foundation day. It's right around the corner. So the last 1 year, a lot of action has happened. And if you really look at it from 2015 till probably IFSCA came in, there were about 29 companies which were set up. But then after IFSCA has come in, we are now at about 200 plus, 209, 212 kind of units. So that's the kind of focus which we have seen in the last 1 year, where it's been about a 65% jump in the number of entities being set up. Also, we have looked at a lot of regulations. If you've really been watching the space on the IFSCA website, be it banking. So good friend from banking is over here. Anupam will quickly talk about that. Be it securities or market infrastructure institutions. Again, good friend Nagendra is over there. They'll be talking more about it. There were also regulations passed for ancillary framework, bullion exchange, finance companies, global in-house companies, and very recently we also have some regulations on the international trade financing services, ITFS. So probably the most pivotal thing is on aircraft leasing. Probably for the first time, we are getting this aircraft leasing business coming into our country. So that's another important regulations going on. On the anvil, we also expect a lot of things around maritime, insurance, reinsurance. So you can see a lot of action from our end. So that's the kind of a big picture I'm trying to play. And now coming very specific to technology, yeah, you're right. Probably the technology focus is immense here. We believe technology and finance go hand in hand, and that's going to be the future. And no wonder we also have a regulatory sandbox framework, which is also published. We can talk a little bit more about it probably in the later during the conversation. But then the idea here is we believe technology can actually amplify this entire aspect of regulations and supervision, because at the end of the day, it's about the ease of doing business and the focus is on the country. So this is like a project for the country. It's a national project and it is the first IFSCA. We said it's the first IFSC because if you really look into the name, it's International Financial Services Centers Authority. And once this stabilizes, I'm sure there's going to be much more coming in the country. With that, probably I'll hand it back to you.
So, quick follow-up question to that. So, in your role as CTO for this entity, can you give us some insights into the kind of things that you are called upon to do?
Right. So for me, the primary focus right now will be on Fintech and subtech, in addition to the other IT initiatives within the organization. So from a Fintech perspective, you would have already seen our regulatory sandbox guidelines. So essentially what we are talking here is two types of sandboxes. One is the innovation sandbox and the regulatory sandbox. In the regulatory sandbox, what we mean is there can be some relaxations to the regulations. It's a live environment with a live set of customer data in a very controlled fashion. Whereas an innovation sandbox could be something which is really innovative with market data, but you do not have the live customer, live environment kind of a thing, so that we can test out things. So overall, when I look at technology, Fintech is definitely on top of our agenda. Also, as a regulator, we are also focusing on the subtech, the supervisory technology. We believe subtech is going to greatly help our regulatory functions and also the regulated entities. Today, if you really look at the cost of regulatory compliance, that is something which could get into bothersome numbers. And that's something we want to kind of make it easy for the regulated entities. That's why our focus is there on the supervisory technology projects. There are plans to kind of take it to the next level, and I'm sure you'll hear about it in the days to come.
Thanks very much, Joseph. So moving on to Anupam now. Anupam, so you lead the international banking unit at IFSC. Uh, so, how do you see the financial services ecosystem developing at Gift City on the back of what IFSC is enabling? And based on what's available in terms of regulations today, what kind of products do you think are feasible?
Thanks, Prakash, and good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. I think just taking on from what Joseph said, the ecosystem is developing quite well here. We already have about 13 Indian banks and 3 MNC banks which have set up offices in Gift City. We have GICs, ICICI Lombard in insurance. Both the exchanges are here. Bullion exchange is getting set up. NSDL and CDSL is here. So, about 75 plus entities in the category of brokers, fund managers, PMS firms, investment advisors, and AIFs have set up offices here. All in all, as Joseph said, more than 200 financial services entities have registered in Gift City, and it's gaining further momentum. In terms of products, today I think trade finance, transaction banking, treasury solutions, wealth management for NRIs is possible. More and more enablers are likely to come as we go forward. So in fact, just talking briefly about ICICI Bank, what is the problem that we are trying to solve here for our clients? Let me talk about a couple of businesses that will be building it up. The first one is cross-border trade finance, where we'll be creating digitized import and export financing solutions for Indian corporates, whether they are transacting cross-border on open account or LC. Secondly, as more and more Indian corporates set up their treasury centers here, we'll be partnering with them for their transaction banking and hedging services. We want to be the banker to the entire, startup ecosystem. I think we'll talk about it, but as more and more Indian startups set up their overseas holding companies and subsidiaries, handle their entire transaction banking and other services. Similarly, for capital market intermediaries, banking and custody services, then we'll have our own treasury hub for corporate and institutional client business. Wealth management I talked about. And last, but among the most important ones, as retail banking services to the employees of the entire Gift City ecosystem as it develops and scales, including GICs, which are global in-house captives.
Thanks, Anupam. So, interestingly, one question on my mind is, you mentioned fintechs. Joseph also mentioned fintechs. Without, what can fintechs do today? Because it seems like today it's more the more foundational infrastructure that needs to be done, right? So, are you confident that there's adequate infrastructure available? The technology infrastructure, exchanges, banks, settlement systems, all of those kinds of things for fintechs who can then build the next layer and take these to the market and segment their customers. I find it a little difficult in my mind to see fintechs already coming in and playing a role at this point. So just wanted your views on that.
Sure. So Prakash, I will take this question in 2 parts. One is, what is a problem fintechs can solve in IFSC Gift City? And second would be, what problem can IFSC Gift City solve for fintechs? So talking about the first one, I think, we talk a lot about B2C fintech, and that's why you're saying, what is the problem that they can solve here? I think I personally believe that B2B fintechs have an equally important role in our economy, in our aim to reach a $5 trillion economy. There are certain areas where B2B fintechs can play a significant role and Gift City and partner with a larger ecosystem, including banks. I would say 4 broad areas. One is import and export financing for MSMEs. This is a large market, and we have just seen the tip of the iceberg. There are, use cases, the problems to be solved in terms of digitization, risk management, fraud management, and other areas in the cross-border trade. The second area is reimagining the entire cross-border B2B payment, which is again an area where fintechs can work in the IFSC ecosystem and solve this problem. Third area is creating digitized fundraising journeys. We're talking about IFSC becoming a key capital market location for raising different kind of funding. So private and public debt, private and public equity, short-term funding. So how do you kind of reimagine and digitize the entire journey from issuer to the investor in terms of flow information, and investor back to the issuer in terms of flow of funds? That could be another use case. The fourth one, I think my friend Somnath will talk about it, is the democratization of global asset classes for domestic investors as they look at dollarizing part of their net worth, as well as for NRIs, US stocks, bonds, digital gold, access to private market, startups raise a lot of private money, through venture funds and stuff like that. There could be opportunity to create, DRs here, or tokenize some of those investments and get access to both domestic as well as to NRIs, to some of those private opportunities. And the last but not the least is when all these opportunities are there, it also means the fintechs which are working on the technology layer or the infrastructure layer, they could partner with different use cases. Coming to the second part of the question, what problem is Gift City solving for fintechs and startups? I think many Indian fintechs are setting up holding companies overseas, as it helps them improve their ability to raise capital. Gift City is working on creating a full financial ecosystem. This would mean setting up holding companies, accelerator, sandbox. I think Joseph talked about it, and also fundraising. In fact, we work with startups in providing them transactional accounts for their holdcos and overseas subsidiaries. Also, IFSCA, the regulator, is working on establishing a fintech bridge with other Indian regulators, and that could be a two-way springboard for global as well as Indian fintechs. And as the IFSC matures, I believe it can also become a fintech innovation hub, not only for India, but for the larger South Asia region. To summarize, I think there are a few themes here. You could have Indian fintech entering sandbox to solve IFSC related use cases. You could have Indian fintech using IFSC platform as a springboard to go overseas or to go into the larger domestic market. You could have Indian fintech using IFSC platform to raise capital. You could have international fintech using IFSC platform to enter India. And last but not the least, there could be a regional flavor here, regional fintechs using IFSC platform to raise capital from global investors, as well as solve use cases both here as well as in domestic market.
Sure, sounds really exciting, Anupam. Looks like a lot of use cases and flows already enabled by the regulation so far. So I'll move on to Nagendra. So Nagendra, you are one of India's core infrastructure providers to NSE. In the Gift City context, if you could give us some insights into what kinds of infrastructure you're enabling and what kind of products you see them enabling near term and over the longer term as well. Really appreciate that.
Thanks, Prakash. Good afternoon to my fellow panelists. So, as one of the world's largest exchange, whenever we venture into any when we are looking at setting up an exchange or when we are launching new products, what we do is, as part of our DNA, NSE's DNA, we try to align ourselves with the government's bigger picture as well as the regulator's vision, right? So as we speak, Joseph didn't talk about, he did mention the word onshoring, right? He did mention about onshoring. And as we speak, IFSCA, the regulator, their vision is to make this region as one of the best global jurisdictions, right? So if we have to align ourselves with the government's bigger picture and IFSCA's vision, I have to, expand the word that Mr. Joseph has used. It's onshoring the offshore, right? So basically, he did talk about Singapore, Dubai. And as we speak, all of you must be aware that Nifty is one of the world's largest contract. So for quite some time, it's been more than 18 months that we are trying to build a connect with SGX for the primary reason that, whatever transactions that are happening in Singapore, we want to bring it to the GIFT region. So down the line, you will see Nifty will stop trading at Singapore, and all the global investors. See, Singapore is an institutional market, right? You will have a plethora of investors, right from the US guys, the UK guys, whoever is trading Nifty, right? The entire order flow will get channelized to the GIFT City, NSE, IFSC. So that's the typical meaning of onshoring the offshore. So this way, we are trying to ensure that whatever transactions are happening around the world on Nifty will get consolidated, and it will be a centralized order matching liquidity pool at NSE, IFSC, GIFT City. Yes,
Yeah.
Prakash.
Yeah, so actually that's a very interesting thought. I just want to interrupt you on that. So approximately how many institutions are we talking about that are currently trading on the Singapore Nifty on the Singapore exchange?
So I think I would prefer to respond it differently. See, the open interest is close to 5 billion, right? So I mean, all the global investors who are currently trading. So in India, you have Nifty as well as in SGX you have, but SGX being more of an IFSC sort of a jurisdiction, you have a lot more relaxations in terms when people trade. So we are trying to mimic. The authority has been flexible. I mean, they are much more forward-looking in terms of how they want to build the region. So with the blessings of the regulator, we have been able to get most of the approvals to ensure that the investors who are trading currently on SGX, they get the same feel when they trade on NSE IFSC. So I'm talking about an open interest of the outstanding position, anything between 4 to 5 billion. So that's the first big ticket product that we are talking about. The second thing, another interesting thing, what Joseph and Anupam mentioned. Joseph talked about a sandbox, and Anupam talked about LRS and democratization of how on products and services. So we are going to launch trading in US stocks in the next couple of weeks. So this is the first time an Indian investor, right, Indian retail investor would be able to trade on US stocks on NSE IFSC. So as we speak, you have a lot of platforms through which people trade US stocks. I mean, there are, I don't want to name them, but you have an opportunity for people to trade on a platform which is governed by a regulator. So what in effect, what I'm trying to tell you is that, it's first of its kind, and it has been approved under the regulatory sandbox. The beauty of this regulatory sandbox is, as Mr. Joseph was mentioning, right? If due to some issue we are not able to envisage or foresee a regulatory change at the time of going live, during the sandbox period, we can always go back to the regulator and seek the necessary dispensation. So we are going to broad base, we're going to bring in retail investors for the first time in this platform, because the exchanges, as Anupam and Joseph were mentioning, we have 2 exchanges here. We have been here for the last 4 years, but it's primarily been an institutional market. For the first time, I mean, again, there are a lot of opportunities for people who want to offer services to bang on these 2 big ticket initiatives that NSE IFSC is planning, and to build a sound technical platform.
Thanks, Nagendra. So you mentioned SGX and trading for global equities for Indian residents. What about commodities exchanges? Do you see any room for those shaping up within GIFT
No,
City?
that's an interesting point. I forgot to mention. My apologies. So today we have a consortium including all the 5 key market infrastructure institutions. That's NSE, we have BSE, we have MCX, NSDL and CDSL. They're the depositories. We have come together and we are setting up an international bullion exchange. So this exchange would primarily be looked as a channelizing exchange for all the gold imports into the country. So there are a lot of discussions being held by the authority with the government to ensure that whatever dispensations are required to make this exchange function, that's been looked into. So to start with, it's going to be gold and silver, but down the line, as you were mentioning, that we can definitely extend this to other products and other commodities. Prakash, thank you.
Again, exciting times. Looking at building these new market access channels. Nagendra, so last question to you. So, how do you see? I mean, I still see this as more infrastructure plays. And how do you see all of this infrastructure actually enabling startups? I mean, Anupam spoke about today it really being a B2B play. Of course, in the equity space, there is options for B2C plays as well if you're enabling purchasing global equities from India. But how do you see in general all of this infrastructure enabling startups, fintech startups?
So that's an interesting question. So there's one fintech lab which is already operational at IFSC. It's called Finex Labs, and we have partnered with Finex Labs. So see, the lab is primarily focused at they're coming up. We have come up with accelerator programs. We are looking at young entrepreneurs who are looking for funding, who need space, right? So that's one where NSE has partnered with the lab as a knowledge partner, where we would want to, we are trying to set up a trade simulation lab there. So anybody wants to build algos, test their algos and deploy it for trading on the IFSC platforms, that would be the first starting point. That's number one. The second thing is that when you're talking about broad basing, when you're trying to bring in new investors into this ecosystem, right? So we've talked about US stocks. For US stocks, all the Indian retail investors have to obviously use the LRS route. So there again, we have tied up with a fintech player, so who will come up with an out of the box solution, like it'll be like a plug and play, right? If there is an investor who wants to trade through a broker, instead of the broker investing on a complete solution, end-to-end solution, which will work with the exchange, clearing corporation, the banks, not just a bank. I'm using the word banks, and the depository, right? It'll be like a plug and play model. So we are already working with fintech. I mean, there is definitely scope for a lot more players to come in, because you need a medium to connect to the infrastructure player. I mean, as an infrastructure provider, I'm giving you services, right? And you have end investors, and who can bridge the gap? I mean, this is obviously going to be bridged by the fintech players. And we are also working with Mr. Joseph on a couple of fintech initiatives, and over a period of time, we will all come to know on, what sort of initiatives are in the pipeline. Thank you, Prakash.
Great, Nagendra. So I'm looking forward to the day when I can download an app on my phone, transfer a few $1,000s from my Indian rupee bank account into that, and buy a Microsoft stock on.
Now that you have made this statement, I will definitely follow up to ensure that you transfer and you trade. And Anupam, you have a client.
Yeah, and yeah, I'm happy to use one of your platforms as well to do that. Anyway, so thanks for that insight, Nagendra. So over to Somnath. Somnath, on this panel, you're one of the true B2C fintechs emerging from India, democratizing stock trading. And what's your view on Gift City and all the regulations that have been enabled? How is it helping you expand cross-border financial services? Can you tell us a little bit?
Firstly, thanks, Prakash. Happy to be here today. So I think firstly, it would give access to retail investors to foreign currency based products, like be it plain vanilla currency products. USD to INR, if you see historically, has depreciated, has USD to INR has appreciated like 5 to 10% year on year for the past 20 years. Be it debt products, FD rates in India has been going down year on year. Be it innovative fixed income products like REITs in Singapore is a pretty advanced market, bringing something like that to Indians, and equity stocks. That's something we understand really well. So and why haven't retail investors historically had access? I think there have been 2-3 points here. Firstly, this LRS, the way it works. Generally, Indian banks have been dependent on international banks like, say, the JP Morgan, Citibanks, and Barclays, because they haven't had presence in the other countries. But when it comes to gift, it's, I think ICICI, be it HDFC, be it SBI, they would all have presence within India and at gift. So they would be controlling the end-to-end transaction. So they would be able to reduce these transaction charges, the online experience, and control the entire thing. So that's something which would be really beneficial to retail investors. And historically, all these international products, be it REITs, be it US stocks, or be it any international investment products, they've been accessible only to HNIs and family offices historically. So this would now probably give a lot of easier access to retail investors. And something generally as an investor you're supposed to kind of like Indian retail investors historically have had only access to India. So some susceptible risks that they are always kind of prone to are geopolitical risks, currency risks. That's something as an investor we've always learned about, but we haven't had the opportunity to kind of diversify. So it really gives them a lot of access when it comes to this. And specifically speaking about stocks, last year I think we had like a dream run when it came to brokers and whether any capital market intermediaries around the world. I think there were about 14 million demat accounts that opened last year, and about 85% of them were actually in this age group of 20 to 35. So these consumers, when we see them, the thing is, we feel at least that these consumers kind of relate to products and companies that they use, which they don't get access to within India. So I don't think a 20-year-old really relates to, say, a company like Infosys, or I'm not sure whether HDFC Bank also relates to them, but they generally relate to products which they use on a day-to-day basis. And in India, there are only about 2, 3 companies which we use on a day-to-day basis. Like probably, I think Colgate is one which we use every day. I think probably Nestle, Maggie is another. Probably Royal Enfield is another. But very few which we kind of use on a day-to-day basis. And all the companies that we're using every day are all listed in the US, whether it's Facebook or Netflix or Google, which we see every day. So I think there's a big market there if you make it easily accessible to these 20 to 35-year-old age group. And primarily as Zerodha also, out of our 6 million clients, 85% are from that age group. So we do see a huge opportunity there if we make it a lot easier and accessible. So yeah, we see this as a nice opportunity there.
So you're very hopeful that your target demographic of 18 to 40-year-olds would use GIFT City as a channel for overseas investments, enabled by the likes of what NSE is setting up on their exchange.
Correct. So if all the banks, kind of make it easier for them to transfer money and lower the costs, it would definitely be a lot more, attractive for them, because currently, an average retail client, if we do push such a product, we don't see, most of our clients sending across money between, over say the 20 to 40,000 rupees ticket price. So if someone is sending across say 30,000 rupees, for example, currently, the charges that they would face would be anywhere close to 1,500 to 2,000 rupees in fixed charges. And on top of that, they would have a currency conversion of somewhere between 1.5 to 2%. And this I understand because, the Indian banks are kind of dependent on the international banks and their charges as well. So, but here I'm hoping, all the banks, when they all, set up presence on both sides, they would be able to reduce those charges and make it a lot more attractive for retail clients.
That's useful to know, Somnath. So if it's easier for retail customers to transfer money from their Indian rupee accounts into an offshore jurisdiction account, and if banks were able to make that easier in the context of GIFT City, you think that trading on these for foreign stocks on the back of platforms like NSE is enabling will become easier. So you see that as one potential. So that's not a regulatory overhead. It's more of a procedural overhead and potentially a margin overhead from the bank's perspective of how much revenue they want to keep and how much they're willing to pass on to grow the market, right?
Right, makes sense. So I think it's more of a chicken and egg thing. I think the banks probably want to see volumes, and the brokers are also kind of waiting for the system to get easier to bring in those volumes. I think once both of them kind of come in together and all the banks are in place and brokers are bringing in volumes too, I think the charges can be reduced a lot and it can be made a lot more easier.
Sure, thanks, Somnath. So a quick time check.
Prakash, if I may add to what Som just mentioned, so it should not be treated as a marketing pitch, but the points that he made are relevant in terms of the cost incurred by an investor when he's transferring the money. So we have partnered with a couple of banks. I mean, so if any of the brokers want to use the services of that bank, the cost goes down significantly. I mean, so he mentioned around 1,005, 2,000. We have seen some banks. We have got some data as well. And I can say on this platform that if it's 1,005, we can bring it down to 1/10 of the cost. Right. And even the bid ask, when somebody's transferring the money, it will not be 2%. Right. It'll be a much narrower range. So don't treat it as a marketing pitch. What we are trying to say is that, as part of the offering, we have got the all necessary enabling provisions to, ensure that the retail investors are automatically coming into to build the region. I mean, though we have our own objectives, but if you look at the bigger picture, right, this is the first time you will have retail brokers coming and setting up a shop. Right, we never had that. I mean, some of the inquiries that we have been getting are, surprising. I mean, it's not just Som's entity or any other retail broker. They're not in the business of broking, but they still want to jump in, and they're all fintech firms. I mean, wish I could give the names, but they're all fintech guys, and they want to bridge the gap as well as jump in on the opportunity which is being thrown open. That's possible only because of the current regulatory framework. I mean, that should be my closing statement, because the regulatory framework is so conducive to expand and run your business. I think, I've said this multiple times in all my previous panels. The regulator is not a regulator at this point of time. They're playing the role of a developer. I mean, they want to build the region much more forward-looking. I mean, Mr. Injati Srinivas and his team, Manoj, and all the other EDs under him. I mean, it is completely a different environment altogether. Prakash, thank you.
No, thanks, Nagendra. I think that's very insightful. In fact, I was going to ask Somnath, whether the regulator can do something more to make a more conducive system, but I think Nagendra's kind of...
You have to ask. I mean, see, it's like this. If you're hungry, you come, you will be fed, right? See, that should be the bottom line. I mean, we are looking for ideas. When I say we, the region is looking for ideas with a simple objective that the region has to be built.
Right. So quick time check. We're about a minute.
In fact, just to add, while I talked about, B2B fintechs, I think even B2C, especially in the area of payments, outbound payments and wealth tech, which we talked about, that's another big B2C fintech area where you will see much more action going forward.
Prakash, I see just one question. I mean, there is somebody who was asked, how was it going to be different from the platforms like that? Can I respond to that, or are we...
Yeah, so there was one question which actually now there's a lot of questions that have come through all of a sudden, and we're out of time. So I'm going to take the first question that came in, which is from I think Sanchit at Investiture, asking how entrepreneurs can actually connect and get a better sense of what they can get from Gift City.
See, let me kind of take that, so that they get a feel. It's a pretty generic across the segment kind of a question. See, we talked about, in fact, Nagendra talked about the regulator not being a regulator, but being a developer kind of a thing. And that is true because it's part of the mandate of IFSCA to be a developer as well as a regulator. So in addition to these labs, which we talked about, the Finex lab, there are other fintech labs coming in. You won't believe, probably for the first time, a regulator is going to come up with some incentive scheme for the fintechs, which is in the works. There's going to be a regulator-backed hackathons coming in, which will promise a direct entry into the sandbox. So for folks who want to enter in, these could be all great opportunities with the accelerator already in, with the incentive scheme in the works, with hackathons lined up from a banking, market or an insurance perspective, because at the end of the day, it's a unified regulator. So we look at open banking, we graduate to an open kind of an insurance, open mortgage, whatever that is. So that's an open finance ecosystem towards an open data ecosystem, which we are looking at. So we are open to new ideas. We are looking at tokenization of real estate. We are looking at tokenization of bullion and all the latest things which we want to. And that's why we have the perfect regulatory sandbox to try out these things, as Nagendra has told. Probably I'm running out of time, so over to you.
So Joseph, I think for the entrepreneurs on the panel, is it safe to say that if they need to connect with Gift City for ideas, they can just drop you or your team an email and ask you questions? I mean, it should be as simple as that if you ask me, right?
So the regulations or the circular is out there for the regulatory sandbox. So people have interesting ideas, they can always apply through that, and you're getting a very fast response coming back to them on what's possible and how we can try. And then these hackathons and these accelerators are all there to actually help people bring up their ideas to fruition over here in the IFSC.
Thanks so much, Joseph. I think we're out of time now, and there's a lot of questions. So if I could request the organizers to just save that and send this out to the panelists. If there's anything that we can add value to offline, we'll try. Can't promise, but we will try. But just wanted to thank the organizers for this opportunity. It's been a very enlightening session. Seems like exciting session as well. I'm truly excited to be able to start trading US stocks and also commodities sitting in India. Joseph, Anupam, Somnath, and Nagendra, thank you very much for sharing your useful insights and perspective. Swati, over to you for closing.
Thank you so much, Mr. Jayaraman, and thank you all the panelists, for making this session possible and joining us today. And it was indeed an interesting and an insightful session, as Mr. Jayaraman said. Thank you so much once again, and have a pleasant day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Swati.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.